My name is David Brown, and I'm just going to speak very briefly on behalf of Leo Baeck Institute to welcome you to this program about the children's literature of Lore Segal. Um, Tell Me a Lore. We're going to hear from a number of um, uh, children's books authors and artists, as well as a scholar who's done work on Lore Segal. And we're very excited to have all of them. We're also going to hear from the curator of our exhibition, Karen Hunta, who I'll introduce in just a moment, who will really kick off the program. But I want to encourage everyone to please, if you haven't already, come to Leo Baeck Institute at the Center for Jewish History, uh, 15 West 16th Street, right here in Manhattan, and see the Lore Segal exhibit. And that's true too, the life and work of Lore Segal. It's been really a thrill and a pleasure for Leo Baeck Institute to present the work of someone who has a very classically German Jewish story that is so resonant with the papers that we preserve in our archive and in our library, but who is also known and beloved as as an American writer, as some really a writer of world literature, and also as a children's book author. So it ticks a lot of boxes, and I hope is also um, allowing us to reach a lot of people. You can come see the exhibit through April 15th, and we are going to have a star-studded closing program on April 15th, featuring a number of actors, some names and faces you'll certainly recognize. I'll only name a few. There's James Cromwell, who was most recently in Succession. There's Tony Kalem, um, and Mary Beth Pyle, and a number of these artists are very familiar with Lore Segal's work, and some I think we're also close with her personally. They're going to be reading from her collection, Still Talking, and we're working with an organization called Word Theater, produced by an actor named Cedering Fox, who does really great events with contemporary authors, uh, bringing their work to the stage. Through actors and staged readings. So April 15th, we'll drop. Stephanie has dropped the link in the chat. So tickets are still available, but they're going fast. So please consider joining us for that, and come see the exhibit too. So I will now turn things over to get us started to Karen Hunta, who is the exhibitor and the curator and the driving force behind the Lore Segal exhibit at LBI. She uh, put on an exhibit in Vienna with Lore Segal shortly before her passing, and this exhibit is sort of an adaptation of that. And it's been great to work with you, Karen, and we're really glad that you helped us bring this to the Leo Baeck Institute. And I'll turn it over to you now to get us into the program.
Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited. We have almost 60 people in the room, and I think this is the first ever event on Lore's children's literature. And as we were preparing for this event, we determined that we all have different roles in Lore's life. We all knew and loved her. I am the curator of her exhibition, and I'm also hoping to write a biography on her life and work. And we have in the room today Ellen Handler Spitz, who teaches in the humanities program at Yale, and I think is the first scholar to really dive into Lore's children literature. She's the author of Inside Picture Books, The Brightening Glance, Imagination and Childhood, and Illuminating Childhood. And she has also written book reviews for the New Republic and has published and lectured widely on the art and psychology and the aesthetic lives of children. Then we also have in the room Sarah Baker, who is not only the executive director of the Society of Children's Books Writers and Illustrators, but she's also Laurie's cousin. Um, and at the center, she leads the staff and works closely with the board of directors, the advisory council, and the global regional teams on behalf of members around the world. She began her career in children's book publishing at Penguin Young Readers Group, where she designed children's books. Sarah is also a children's book illustrator with her debut illustrated picture book coming out on May 2026, in May 2026. And it's entitled Becca and Bobby's Bucket List and was written by Laura Gell and will be published by Rocky Pond Books. She lives in the Hudson Valley, New York with her husband, two daughters, two sweet dogs, and one grumpy cat. And we also have in the room Paul O. Zelinsky, who illustrated one of Laurie's children's books. And his illustrations have won wide acclaim and many awards, including the Caldecott Medal for retelling of Rapunzel and 3 Caldecott honors for Hansel and Gretel, Rumpelstiltskin, and Swamp Angel. But perhaps his best known work is the movable parts book, The Wheels on the Bus, which has sold millions of copies around the world. And my kids really love that book as well. Then we have Sophie Blackall in the room, who was a great friend of Laura's. She's an award winning illustrator of over 60 books for children, including the New York Times best-selling Ivy and Bean series, the 2016 Caldecott Medal winner, Finding Winnie, and the 2019 Caldecott Medal winner, Hello Lighthouse, which she also wrote. Originally from Australia, she now splits her time between Brooklyn, New York, and the Catskill Mountains, where she and her husband run a retreat for the children's book community called Milkwood Farm. And I think some of Laurie's kitchenware went to the farm. Am I right about that? Yes. So how this is going to work, Ellen is going to start us off with a 15-minute scholarly talk about Tell Me a Mitzi, and then Sarah's going to come in and also present the slideshow, and then Paul and Sophie are also going to talk about their work and friendship with Lore. So Ellen, please take it away.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Is that okay? Let me start by thanking Karen Hanta for this invitation. It's an honor to speak in tribute to Lore Segal, whom I was blessed to know late in her life, not solely as Lore Segal, the writer, who, as her son Jacob so beautifully described it, has made our world larger, but as a living person through the generosity of her beloved friend and mine, the nonpareil New York writer Vivian Gornick. Lore Segal never left her childhood behind, as many people do. Vividly, it stalked her mind, impelling her to wonder and to never stop asking why. Among all else, to write children's books, books that feature memorable, often whimsical, yet deeply resonant situations and stories about families and animals, the everyday, about finding one's way. Tell Me a Mitzi, All the Way Home, the story of Mrs. Lovewright and Purrless, her cat, the mole stories, and in collaboration with Maurice Sendak, Lore translated several Grimm's Brothers fairy tales from the original German. Her pages talk directly to children, as if through a pipeline pumping straight into their hearts. No palliatives, no additives or intermediaries, no mitigating, softening agents, for like Lore, young children want truth. They cannot define it, but like bloodhounds, they sniff out what's phony. In what follows, I'm going to zero in on Lore's much beloved picture book, Tell Me a Mitzi, published in 1970 by Farrar, Straus and Giroux, and available again to the joy of all who cherish it and to the joy of children yet to come, with its original illustrations by Harriet Pincus intact, images without which Lore did not want to bring the book back. Marveling at how Mitzi delves into children's minds, we may ponder the part played by Lore's own early years long ago, and by her stalwart determination to endure. My hunch is that secrets kept in childhood, or at least the experience of keeping them, transformed themselves gradually into literary gems after she had made her home in New York. Drawing doubtless also on the daily life with her own two children, Lore's alchemy brought forth simple, wondrously honest tales, real and surreal, for other people's children. Stories to enjoy, but also to use, so as to feel comprehended, and therefore, as she herself never quite did, safe, to feel as it were at home. I asked Lore if we could meet one cold day in February 2018 over babka and coffee in her sprawling Upper West Side apartment, its walls covered with drawings by Sendak and William Steig. We did. And my enchanted eyes fell instantly upon a large, battered, much played with dollhouse, which Lore had constructed years ago for her daughter Beatrice. Dollhouses, we might note, are microscopic homes in which everything can be arranged to the heart's content, used as such by little girls for many decades when domesticity was destiny. The casual, seemingly eternal presence of this dollhouse in the flat offered a startling gift of insight into Lore's sensibility, how much home matters to her. Her riveting memoir, Other People's Houses, published serially by The New Yorker in 1958, before becoming a book, recounts her experience as a 10-year-old refugee, sent away from her native Austria, away from her parents, to the strange British Isles, where people spoke a different language, and where, over the next 7 years, she lived with 5 foster families in their respective homes. Endowed with superior intellectual ability, a resilient and adaptive cast of mind, acute sensitivity, and a love of words, she kept secrets. Secrets from others who could not and would not understand her, and secrets even from herself. And she wrote. Fixing me with her sharp blue eyes, she cocked a curly head. She laughed gleefully at something we both found amusing. At nearly 90, she sparkled, radiating her sprightly warmth. She spoke matter-of-factly and yet with jubilance, tempered always by an underlying timbre of qualm and reserve. Her speech struck me as sibylline, oracular. Tiny of stature, Lore filled the surrounding space, constraining me from coming too close, and I basked hesitantly that winter morning in her presence. Lore was, after all, one of those blessed, cursed children of 1938, banished horrifically and then rescued mercifully from Nazified Vienna, put on the Kindertransport shortly after Hitler marched into Austria. Her Jewish parents were threatened with degradation, deportation, and death. Willing their little girl to survive, they let her go. They let go of her. At what cost? Loving, admiring Mitzi, one ponders the part this may have played in its genesis. Rethinking Mitzi, I'm remembering a controversial 1963 essay, Meditations on a Hobby Horse, by the renowned British art historian Ernst Gombrich. Does a child's play ever become art? Gombrich asks. And to explore this question, he offers the example of a hobby horse. A hobby horse, says Gombrich, needs no head or mane or saddle. If a child wants to ride, all that's needed is a simple stick. With this to straddle, the child can gallop and elaborate marvelous fantasies. And yet, Gombrich warns, the stick on its own cannot be considered art. For if an artist, such as Picasso, for example, were to send such a stick to an exhibition, people might find it satirical or take it as a testament to the artist's regard for humble things. What Picasso cannot do is to make the hobby horse mean to us what it meant to its first creator. For that way, Gombrich says, is barred by the angel with a flaming sword. And when he says this, he affirms the impossibility of returning to Eden, the impossibility of re-entering a child's mind, the impossibility of looking, for example, at a photograph, a snapshot of yourself taken at age 4 or 5, and knowing how and what you were thinking then. And yet, isn't this what Lore Segal accomplishes in Take Me a Mitzi? For as she herself might say, there are other truths. And Mitzi, showered with awards, all validated by its staying appeal for half a century. And what I would say is because, in fact, it does what Gombrich says can't be done. And it's what the greatest books for children do. It unfurls and unconceals aspects of a child's mind that are normally sealed off from us adults. And when this happens, children fall in love, as they do with Goodnight Moon, with Peter Rabbit, with The Story of Ferdinand, Harold and the Purple Crayon, and Where the Wild Things Are. For with and in and through such books, they feel recognized, seen, and known and loved. Trenchantly real and quaveringly surreal, Mitzi springs from a family's daily life in New York City, 1950s to 60s. New York City spells home. Teeming detail gladdens its pages, filled with Harriet Pincus's accompanying art. I think, Stephanie, we can just have the screen share. Unidealized pictures that feature squat, fleshy-nosed, round-faced people in cozy visual settings, the perfect ambiance for Lore's prose. A local habitation and a name, as the bard would say, immersed in New York's cityscape. Brownstones, inside and out, storefronts, fire hydrants, street vendors, yellow taxicabs, one chalked hopscotch grid showing Potsy, a sidewalk jump rope game, a watchful doorman in braid, a dairyman delivering milk in glass bottles. Lore, of course, penetrates the external. Seamlessly, she transforms the quotidian into the fanciful. It's a transformation that feels as effortless as breathing. Her spare sentences and delectable inventions, illumined by these illustrations in ink and full color, showcase an exquisitely balanced and felicitous collaboration between an artist who uses words in order to render the insides of children and an artist who uses pictures to show their outsides. A pushcart street vendor in an aviator's hat sells 10-cent sweet potatoes, while boys chalk on the street, girls in mittens and gleefully patterned knee socks sit curbside, kibitzing. In a nearby doorway, that mustachioed doorman in brass toggles and epaulets and a visor stands guard, hands clasped confidently behind his back. Okay. Each of Mitzi's 3 chapters features the same family cast of characters. I think we can stop the screen when we want to. A little girl called Martha, her baby brother Jacob, her mother, her father, and in the middle, in a story about sneezing, her grandma. In that chapter, brilliantly, the requested story becomes the cold itself, the flu. For Martha, at the beginning of each chapter, asks for a story. Tell me a Mitzi, she begs. And the tales that follow feature her, alias Mitzi, and importantly, not always in the starring role. The beauty of this childhood wish to be present in her story recalls a delightful verse by A.A. Milne. They're changing guard at Buckingham Palace. Christopher Robin went down with Alice. Do you think the king knows all about me? Sure to, dear, but it's time for tea, said Alice. And Lore's story make good, for she does know about you. First, a little girl wakes up early before her parents and seeks adventure. Next, everybody in the family comes down with the flu. And last, father takes his children to a parade. What's familiar and commonplace to us adults transmutes in children's minds to fantasy and allure. Remember to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street by Dr. Seuss. But stunningly with Lore, adventure never passes beyond the limits of what a child might actually imagine. And to me, this is perhaps the greatest genius of her book. Mitzi, after dressing her baby brother and herself in the early morning while her parents are asleep, hails a taxi cab. She's seen her parents do that. But then, not realizing that a taxi driver needs a street address, she and Jacob try to visit their grandparents. Lore, who once came as a child to a strange new land, retains this quintessential childhood experience of incompletely grasping the basics of the adult functioning world. And baby Jacob, who only repeats da 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 to grown-ups, speaks perfect English to Mitzi. Before leaving, he peremptorily commands, "Change my diaper." He even reminds his big sister that she must not go out in her pajamas. We conjure young Lore alone, knowing her native German, a language unknown to her English hosts. And later on in the morning, back home again on the edge of her bed, Mitzi tells her mother she's too tired to take off her own pajamas. And she says, "Mommy, where do Grandma and Grandpa live?" 6 West 77th Street comes the reply, and then, "Why do you ask?" And Mitzi's laconic reply is, "Because." Thus, all the secrets are kept. And children love this. They love to share Mitzi's secrets. They delight in the fact that baby Jacob, for instance, speaks clearly to her, but not to the grown-ups. This is because Mitzi can imagine what he would be saying if he could speak properly, and because she understands him viscerally. On page after page, Lore reveals insights like this and affords access to children's inner worlds. An exquisite example occurs in the chapter called Mitzi and the President. Mitzi and Jacob are taken by their father to a parade. After all the excitement of the motorcade, the parade passes by, and little Jacob, utterly enchanted, cries, "More!" Tersely, his father responds, "All gone, lunchtime." But Jacob shouts louder and louder, calling for the prey to come back. Then lo and behold, the parade does come back. Jacob's plea is actually heard, and the president talks with Mitzi. The motorcade makes a U-turn because, as the president calmly points out, there is no reason why it should go in one direction rather than the other. And the child's wish, perfectly logical, is allowed to come true. And only after that can Jacob, portrayed now from the rear in his short pants and suspenders, say the final words, all gone, repeating now with satisfaction instead of frustration what his father had said earlier. Jacob and the children listening to the story now feel deeply gratified. And Lore has engaged her young audience at the precise level of their own imaginative powers. But what do we hear? Is it that little girl longing for her own parents to come back and then finally seeing them again? Born within just a year of Anne Frank, who was similarly a gifted writer, Lore Segal survived when so many others perished. She made of her life a blessing, and we are so fortunate to have her work enduring today, work through which her indomitable spirit lives. Thank you.
Hi, Ellen. I think it's my turn. I think that was so beautiful and interesting and wonderful. Um, I'm Sarah Baker. I'm going next. It's a little bit intimidating to talk about Lore publicly because I'm not a scholar like Ellen. It's hard to do her justice. But Lore was my cousin, so that's how I'll speak about her and her work. Her beloved Uncle Paul, who she wrote about in Other People's Houses, was my grandfather. So that's our relation. And even though I only saw Lore and her children 2 or 3 times a year, we have a very small family. And Lore was incredibly important to me and to all of us. I looked up to her always. She was intellectual and funny and stylish. Her apartment was so stylish. It was the epitome of New York cool. And she always made me feel very special when I saw her. She seemed genuinely interested in me and who I was. And growing up, I felt pretty average. But I always thought if I'm related to Lore Segal, then maybe I can be something special too. And she gave me that feeling just by being part of my family. I'm going to share some slides. So this is Lore with my kids when they were very little. And this is Lore and I and my sister and our dogs. So my parents read me Lore's books always since I was born. Her books have been a part of my life always. And especially Tell Me and Mitzi, but really all of them. And it's hard I mean, they were children's books, they were read to me, of course, but it's hard to really explain what a huge presence her books and her voice had in my life. And, you know, she translated The Juniper Tree, illustrated by Maurice Sendak, and just as an example of how present she was in our lives when my grandparents would come visit me in California. Paul would read to me from the juniper tree, which is pretty creepy. But we would choose our favorite Grimm tales and we would act them out together over and over again. It became our game that we played for many, many years. One of our favorites was Many Furs, which is illustrated here. We made them less creepy than they were. And, just her stories were just such a huge part of my life. And growing up, knowing that Lori was an author and that she worked closely with people like Maurice Sendak and Paul Zelinsky, it gave me the insight from a very young age that real people make the books that we love. That doesn't just happen magically, which I think it could easily feel if you didn't have that kind of example in your life. I knew that real people live their lives as writers and artists, and that it just affected my life and how I saw the world really profoundly. Um, when I was very young, my parents visited Lori when she was with Maurice Sendak. I'm not exactly sure what it was, some kind of a signing event. And Sendak made them this sketch of Mickey from In the Night Kitchen. It was framed in our house since I began forming memories. So it's like one of the images that's really an early image in my brain. And I looked at it every single day of my life growing up. Sometimes other kids were like, "Why is there a naked boy on your wall?" I said, "Don't you know what this is?" And even though this isn't a Lore Segal book, it was linked with her in my mind. So there was just this constant presence she had in our lives. And when I was 4, the story of Mrs. Lovewright and Purrless, her cat, um, was was published and it was dedicated to me. The first printing was, and this was and is a huge point of pride for me. I think I probably brought it to various show and tells like 20 times, and it made me feel really deeply connected to Lori, and it made me feel connected to children's books. Um, I, I don't know if I would have put it this way when I was 15 or 20 even, but I did in some way feel like children's books were like my destiny. And I think it was mostly because of this. Um, so I really started gearing my, kind of creative energy towards children's books so much in college. I got a job after college in a children's book imprint where I felt very much at home. I attended night classes at SVA with Sergio Ruzier because he illustrated 2 of Lori's books. And that was instrumental in me kind of finding my voice as an artist. And then when I started working at SCBWI, I got to work with Paul Zelinsky, who had illustrated Purrless. Both autographs are on this page here. And that felt so full circle, again, to be collaborating with Paul. It really felt, it has felt throughout my life like the people who love Lori and love her books have a way of finding each other. And it's still happening. And it feels like Lori is connecting us in a really beautiful way. So it's been my dream to be a children's book illustrator, and I got my first picture book illustration contract a couple of years ago. And as soon as I read the manuscript for the first time, I knew immediately that I wanted to make the book in some ways kind of an homage to Lori, and that I wanted to use Tell Me a Mitzi as a big inspiration for the style. And although Lori passed away before the book was finished, she knew I got to talk about it with her. She knew that I got the contract, that I was working on it. She was very excited for me. And she even knew that I planned um, to base the book kind of on her in some ways, the way I approach the illustrations. So this title page, that's the entrance to Lori's apartment. Um, and while I was working on the art, I finished a lot of the final art really at the end of Lori's life. And it was very emotional. And it was really, really meaningful for me to get to include details and references to Lori and her work and her home. And the vast majority of people who read the book might never know that, but I'll know. And people who recognize it will know. And that feels incredibly special. Um, uh, the reference to Harriet Pincus's art in Tell Me a Mitzi, it just really led the way for me. And I tried to make it look like the Upper West Side where Lori lived. Um, this is a loose interpretation of Lori's rooftop. Um, in the interior scenes, there's just details all over the place from Lori's home. All the views out of the windows are based on photos that I took in her apartment. There are little trinkets and things and art from her apartment. So it really felt when I was working on this book that I was kind of channeling her and thinking about just her and her creative energy made its way into the book. And you'll see little Mole from Mole Shouted is in the top left. There's a stack of Lori's books on the bottom left corner. The flowers in the windowsill are from her bedroom. Um, and yeah, there's objects from her home, and so she never got to see this, but it makes me feel when I look at the book like this connection that I always felt with her. And I feel so lucky that I got to do that. And it just made so much sense for this book. Um, and the last thing, I put a spread from Weimel Shouted. I've always loved this spread because I feel like I'm seeing Lori herself as an exhausted grandmother and as a little kid because I know she could stand on her head. And, you know, Lori's voice and her style of storytelling for me will always relate back to what I know about her childhood, all the things that Ellen covered so beautifully. And growing up, I don't think I knew very many kids whose relatives survived the Holocaust and were talking about it. But in her stories, there's, it's inextricably linked. There's a matter of factness about things. There's worry and anxiety in her books. There's self-deprecation. And all of that feels like really familiar and cozy. And as I've met more and more people over the years who love Lori's books, it just seems like that sensibility, it could have been very other and it could have been very sad. But through Lori's lens, it became universal. And it wasn't sad in these books. It was just interesting and funny. Um, so I've just always felt really lucky to be connected with Lori. And the amazing thing about her children's books and all of her books really is that everyone who loves her books are lucky. We're all so lucky that we can just pick up one of her books whenever we want and we can hear her voice. It's such a wonderful voice. So thank you for listening to me ramble a little bit about my cousin. I feel really honored to be part of this panel. Um, and thanks for including me. And I'm going to pass it over to Paul Zelinsky.
Okay, I'm here. So thank you, Sarah. That was really, really great and such fun. Also, Ellen, it's interesting and very moving for me to be listening to these tributes. And I wish that I could talk spontaneously, but I figured that if I didn't write something down, I would not be able to put in the slides that I had to send previously. So I will just start in, say that my major connection to Lore is being one of the people who was lucky enough to illustrate a book of hers. And I think actually Lore, present company aside, Lore was lucky in the quality of illustrators who got to illustrate her manuscripts because they were really great. Harriet Pincus would have become much better known if she hadn't died very young. And then there was James Marshall, Rosemary Wells, Marcia Sewell, Boris Kulikov, and Sergio Ruzzier, who unfortunately couldn't make it into this panel today. And her novel Lucinella had a jacket by William Steig, and for heaven's sake, there was Maurice Sendak. So anyway, it was around 1984 sometime that Knopf's amazing children's book editor Francis Foster asked me if I could illustrate this manuscript called The Story of Mrs. Lovewright and Purrless, Her Cat. And it was just a delight to read. The language was natural, but off in some strange, knowing, and fun to read way. And even though the story posed a lot of challenges to illustrate, I jumped at the chance. And I felt like I knew Lore already, and I'll tell you why. Now, I'd gone to Yale. I was class of 74. And at Yale, privilege just floated through the air. As Ellen, you know, the most prominent people in every field were teaching there. And if not that, they'd come through and lecture. And I had managed to get myself into a seminar with about 12 others taught by Maurice Sendak. And at the time, he was working on the pictures for a 2-volume collection of the Grimm's fairy tales with translator Lore Segal. And if we could have a picture, my first picture is of that. So Maurice was a great presence. He was very congenial to us, and he talked about almost anything. No, he talked about anything, and that included his work on these stories and Lore Segal. So I guess you can stop this picture. He introduced us to Tell Me a Mitzi, which he loved, and I loved. I bought the copy I still have. And at one point, Maurice brought Lore to Yale as a speaker, and that was when I first met her. And when their book came out, I immediately bought a copy of The Juniper Tree, and like an idiot, I never asked either of them to sign it. So it was about 10 years later that I was offered the manuscript of Mrs. Lovewright, and it was a treat for multiple reasons. But both Lore and I, though, observed the traditional protocol in children's publishing, meaning that we communicated only via Francis Foster. So I didn't connect with her personally at that point, but I did take other people's houses out of the library and read it very carefully, thinking that it could somehow help me with the drawings for the book. And I decided in some way, in some weird, indefinable way, that I'd base Mrs. Lovewright, the character, on Lore herself. And I never actually told her this, so I'm sorry, Lore. But I don't know really in what way they came out like her. But I adored, and I still love the beginning of this, the opening of the story. It just says, Mrs. Lovewright was a chilly person. And that says so much there. And then in rapid fire prose, it lists the many things that she would do every night, the next picture, to make herself less chilly, which concluded in the decision to put herself, to get herself a cat. And that was the beginning of one disaster after another. Lore told me later that she thought this aspect of the story was like the Three Stooges. So when they showed her my finished illustrations, Lore wrote me the most wonderful note of thanks. I have a picture of it here to show, just because I was so amazed to find it in some of the files I was looking through 2 days ago. You can't quite read it, but maybe if you take a screenshot and look at it later, you'll see some amazing little points made. And maybe when we chat, we can talk a little bit about that because they refer to Mitzi. anyway, I sent her back a photo of my daughter, Anna, who it's the picture here. She was then just about 2, reading one of her favorite books. Could we have the picture? You have to see my daughter, Anna. There she is. Yes. And I still have a beautiful reply to that. And I also have to show you a beautiful photo of Anna's own offspring, which is the next picture, Zane, at the exact same age, reading one of his favorite books, which is Mrs. Lovewright. But I couldn't show that photo to Lore because it was taken 2 days ago. Zane lives in Melbourne, Australia, by the way. So off with the photos. Mrs. Lovewright. It was an odd book with its not really happy ending. And though Knopf, which is part of Random House, produced it nicely, their expectations were low. And it clearly wasn't going to be one of their big books on the list. But immediately after it was published in the fall of 1985, it started getting extremely positive notice, and it landed in the best books roundup of many magazines, and with a rave review in the Washington Post and the New York Times Book Review, where it was one of their coveted best illustrated books. And it immediately sold out its entire printing, which had been modest. And this was in November. And a reprint wasn't managed until February, by which time it was last year's book, and the momentum was all lost, and it went out of print before too long. But as a result of the book, Lore and I did get together socially, for which I'll always be grateful, because she was such a delightful person to talk to. We were connected again professionally years later when Anne Schwartz, who was then at Simon & Schuster, managed to arrange for a new edition of Mrs. Lovewright. And at that point, Lore and I could talk with each other, and sporadically we continued to do so until the end. So we had a lot of contact mostly recently. It started because of my connection with Maurice. Lore told me of some tape recordings she'd made of an extended conversation she had with him while they were working on the juniper tree. So she was hoping to publish an essay about that, but also to do something with the actual recordings. And I thought I might be able to help. But permissions and other issues turned out to be more of a roadblock than I'd expected. And it was all in stasis when she died. But those taped conversations were fascinating, very smart, and they talked about the tales with such insight and depth and erudition. And they talked about specific sketches for the tales and the kinds of artistic decisions Maurice faced in making them. It's a kind of nuts and bolts specificity that I don't think I've seen coming out of Sendak material, as far as I know. And Lore brought this out of him. And by the way, Lore's daughter Beatrice listened to these tapes not that long ago and told me how surprised she was to hear much more of a German accent in her mother's speech than she was used to. So apparently it continued to fade from the 70s up to now. I hope someday there can be an exhibit that brings together these conversations and the drawings and the sketches, which probably still exist. So, and to see a show like that would be tremendous. And I don't think Lore expected to be looking down on us now after she died, but if she is anyway, I know that an exhibit like that would make her extremely happy. So making Lore happy is an apt way to segue to Sophie Blackall, the next speaker, because in the last few years of her life, Lore's acquaintance with Sophie was something that brought her a lot of pleasure. And I know that because Lore told me. So now I'll pass the baton on to Sophie, and I'm sure we'll see what Lore meant by that. No pressure, Sophie. So on you go.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Sarah and Ellen, for all those lovely words about Lore's work and Lore as a person, and Karen for the lovely introductions, and for the Leo Baeck Institute for holding this in the first place. It's always a delight and a pleasure to talk about Lore, who we miss intensely. I met Lore maybe, gosh, 8 years ago. And when you visited Lore, here's the thing. There was a sign on the front door that would say, "It's open, come in." And then, Sarah, if you could show this picture, the first thing you would see is, like as not, Lore in the doorway, waving to you, being delighted that you are in her home, in her hallway, and standing in front of the portrait that Sendak did of her, I think in about 20 seconds, as a wild thing. And it was such a fantastic incongruous thing, this enormous wild thing next to tiny spirited Laurie in the hallway. Laurie's stories, whether for children or adults, defy description. They upend our expectations, and I feel like they leave us thrilled to be alive, which is how I felt spending time with Laurie. I have Sarah to thank for meeting Laurie. I think we have a picture of the exact moment. It was at the Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators Gala. Was it 2018, Sarah? You would know.
I think so.
And I think so. And Sarah said to me when I arrived, guess what? Lore Segal is here. And if you want to meet her, you can find her. She is in the room. You won't miss her. And I had been such an enormous fan of Tell Me a Mitzi. It had shaped my children's childhood. We read it constantly. And I don't think I'm lying if I were to say it is one of the books that made me want to write for children. So there was Laurie, and we started a conversation. I was wise enough to, Beatrice, her daughter, was there as well, and I was wise enough to ask if she wanted a glass of wine, which somehow nobody had thought to offer her. I'm sure Beatrice had, but she had her hands full with many things. So I immediately won Laurie's heart and attention. And then I was crafty because I said, after our lovely conversation, we talked about our favorite books. And I said, if a person was to bring small, delicious treats and not stay for very long, could a person come and visit you sometime? And she said she would love that. And that began our friendship over the last years since then. And I cannot tell you what a profound impact it had on my life. Laurie taught me not only things about how to be a writer, but how to be a person alive in the world. Her first response to everything that happened to her, from the time she was a child on the Kindertransport fleeing Nazi-occupied Austria to the later years of her life and months and weeks and days when she was losing her eyesight and sometimes struggling to remember words or things or phrases or events, her first response to any of those things, grief, anguish, awkwardness, discomfort, assimilation, reconciliation, loss, love, was, isn't this interesting? And then her second response was to write about it. And I think she said to all of us, if I didn't write, what would I do? And I think the writing kept her alive. It kept her engaged. It kept her curious. But that question, I wrote it out on a piece of paper and stuck it on my pinboard, and I look at it often. And it is such a way of making your way through the world with that question, isn't this interesting? Because the things that fall us are perhaps not always, we don't see it through that lens, but if we do, we can shape our response to it. And she did that better than anyone. As a writer, she has such intense inquisitiveness and clear-eyed honesty, especially when she's lying to us, and which she did often. She was fascinated with the fragility of memory, and she would tend her memories with affection, even as she trampled on them. She was so interested in how memories change over time. And as Ellen said in the beginning, she never left her childhood behind, but those versions of herself would change as they do for all of us, and she would revisit them and try and hold on to that little bit of her true self, which had become layered and shape-shifting over time. When you would call Laurie on the phone, she wouldn't say hello, she would say, there you are. And I can hear her voice in my head. And I think that's what her books did as well. You would open them and it would be Laurie saying, there you are, as a reader. Here I am, and you're about to hear a wonderful story. Sarah, the next photograph, I think, is of the books that I have illustrated with my beloved Annie Barrows. We did the Ivy and Bean series together, and we have 3 more books called Stella and Marigold. And the very first one we dedicated to Laurie because she was very much our inspiration and the voice in our heads. And the next slide was at a dinner where Sarah was as well, where I had the enormous privilege and pleasure of reading to Laurie some of the early proofs, and she was laughing her head off. And Annie didn't ever get to meet Laurie, but we love signing these books knowing that that Laurie's voice is part of them as well. The final thing I want to show you is after Laurie died, any of us who spent time in her house saw her kitchen wall, which was almost like a work of art. It was pegboard hung with various kitchen implements, an inordinate number of choppers that were kind of like whaling flanging tools, but they were nut choppers or pastry scrapers, and all of these other things that also were kind of like the layers of memory, the things that she had collected over the years. Many of them she said she hadn't used in decades. But I wondered what was going to happen to this wall. And Laurie's family thought that they would like to keep these things, but perhaps didn't have room for them right now. So one of the great and wonderful things about having a creative retreat center in a huge old dairy farm is that we have space. And so I asked if we could install Laurie's kitchen exactly as it is on the wall in our art studio in the old calf barn at Milkwood, where it stands now. It was a fantastic, fun puzzle putting it together. I had a couple of my studio mates, children's book illustrators as well, Brian Floker and Johnny Marciano and Robert Watkins helped me install it. And we looked at the photographs and did it meticulously, just like a puzzle. So it's as close as possible to the way it was, including the landline wall phone that's attached there that you can see. And this installation now will be there for as long as it is until Laurie's family might want some of these things in their own homes. But in the meantime, new generations of children's book writers and illustrators are drawing them and getting to see them all together. And it feels again like a little part of Laurie living on. But of course, the main thing is that we have her books and that we get to share them with children and we get to read them ourselves. And I feel so incredibly grateful to have been a part of her life and to have had her as a part of my life. And I have you all to thank for that. And now I think there may be possibly some questions.
Karen, you're muted
Karen.
still.
Mhm. And if there aren't, we can just chat.
Karen, you're still muted.
Yes, thank you so much, Sarah, Ellen, Sophie, Paul. The wheels in my head are spinning, are going round and round, and I picked up so many insights that I would like to investigate further. And please put your questions in the Q&A. And I would also like to point out that many of Laurie's books are available at Ruth's Bookstore at the LBI. They have Mitzi. And next week we should have Other People's Houses and Her First American. Lucinella is there. What else? The Journal I didn't keep is there. And have the Kingdom Ladies Lunch. So please come by, see the exhibition, get her books, get them for your friends. And Grandmother Mole actually reappears in Still Talking, in one of the stories in Still Talking. So that's coming out soon as well. And that will be the centerpiece of our reading of Word Theater reading on April 15th. And if you haven't seen a Word Theater performance, please come, because they make literature come to life like nobody else. So yes, let's see. Are there any questions? Not yet. Did any of you have? Oh, there's one. Let me see. The person said Laurie was a talented sketcher as well. Do you think it informed her writing in some way? And that was a question by Peter Stern, who is Lore's cousin as well.
That's my dad. Hi, Dad. I don't know. I don't know the answer to this question, but I will say that I didn't realize that Lore was as when I was little, I just thought of her as a writer. But then when I learned a little bit later on that also she liked to draw and she did yoga and it it's like my eyes opened up to everything that I was actually always seeing all along in her home. Um, she's also an amazing designer. So I
She,
personally, I would think that her aesthetic sense and her design sense and her, her artistic talents were like interwoven into her writing.
she did fabric design professionally, didn't she, for some time?
At the very beginning when she came to the US.
And yeah, the things in her house you could see on that kitchen wall, what a lovely sense of design she had. Uh, I was thinking, uh, would you like me to read some of the note that she wrote, which I think
There are a
is
few more questions
okay,
popping in
then
there. Yeah.
I can come later, sure.
Let's
Oh, Karen, you're muted again.
We have a question. I need to familiarize myself with Lore's books more, but I'm looking for books for 8-year-olds and up. It always seemed to me that Lore's voice was rooted in Yiddish or maybe German, especially Tell Me a Mitzi. Comments?
Maybe that's one for Ellen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I don't really see that. I mean, um, of course, this was early her first language. I don't see that. I don't see that in the language in Mitzi. But I'm not. Uh, it's not apparent to me. I'm not sure about how with the relationship between looking for a book for 8-year-olds and the question of the is this question does the person asking the question is the person fearful that the child won't understand because of some kind of rootedness in German or Yiddish or I guess I don't understand the question very well, but I definitely think that any English speaker would have no trouble with this book.
I know that Lore didn't speak Yiddish. She spoke Austrian German.
German.
Yeah. Then another question is, I can see how Lore's writing for adults and life story may have impacted how she wrote for children. But do you think how she wrote for children impacted her novels?
That's a really interesting question.
I think she was so in tune with her childhood that she was herself. And I think a little like there's the famous Sendak quote that he said he didn't write for children, he wrote books, and other people said they were for children. And I'm not sure if Lore exactly felt that, but I feel like her voice is very similar in all of her writing. So
Yeah, Peter Stern pointed out the building number in Mitzi is 1938. Very interesting. Yes, then we have a question. Purrless was the first book of hers that I read. Is it back in print? If not, can we fix that?
It is not. It came back in print and stayed available for quite a long time, but it's now back out of print. And and it's if you can fix it, please fix it. It it's a question with a lot of very good books that stopped being supported. So it was Pamela Paul, who used to be the head of the New York Times Book Review, not just the children's book section, which she was head of for a while, but then the entire book review has said some fantastic things about Purrless, that book, that it's one of the best picture books there is, and it came out with a really nice blurb on the cover that Sendak wrote. So it would be wonderful to see it back in print, but there's no news there.
The New York Review of Books does this reprinting of books that are out of print, and I think this could certainly be pitched to them. I think that would be, when it's a question of Mitzi, there were people apparently that were willing to publish Mitzi, but without the Harriet Pincus illustrations. And Mitzi categorically refused. She said, I don't want to bring the book back with some new illustrations. I only want it with the Harriet Pincus illustrations. And your illustrations are integral to that story. I think she would feel exactly the same way. But it is now. But I think it's very possible to pitch that, and that should be.
If the New York Review doesn't think that they've already got one like that, but maybe I'll try. But I want to say that Lore told me how much she of course loved the illustrations for Mitzi, and I don't know if she told everybody, but how surprised she was by them. That wasn't the story she thought she was writing exactly. That it was this sort of clever Upper West Side New York sophisticated family that she thought she was writing about, and that there was a doorman in the building and all these things that you see for real. And then the pictures came back, and there was this sort of futzy, way out in Brooklyn kind of feeling to the landscape, and yet there were doormen, but in these little buildings, and it was such a strange and hilarious combination of styles and worlds, really. But they were both parts of New York, put together just beautifully, and she just loved that. That was, I know she wouldn't. I'm sure she would never have, allowed any other pictures to be put to those words.
Yeah. The next question is, do her children ever speak of her publicly? Are they disseminating her legacy? Sarah, do you want to speak about that as a family member?
I think Beatrice and Jacob are watching this right now.
Yes.
And they both spoke publicly at the Leo Baeck Institute, at different events. And I don't know about their plans for the future, but I know that Beatrice in particular is involved with Lore's estate, I guess. I don't know the right terminology. I don't know the specifics, but I think everyone in the family, and especially Beatrice and Jacob, are passionate about Lore's work, all of it, continuing on in all the ways it can and should. I think there are things happening that I wouldn't presume to talk about, but new editions of her books are coming out in different countries. Other things that I'll let Beatrice talk about when she wants to, and I would just like to say, as a children's book person, I would do anything in my power to help all of her books go back in print. We didn't even touch on some of them that are so wonderful. Old Mrs. Brubeck, but they're all wonderful and completely relevant, and kids and anyone reading them now and in the future would just they should get to find them in bookstores and libraries. going forward. So I hope that that happens, and it's one of the reasons why an event like this is so important.
Can I
Yeah.
say something quickly on the subject of Beatrice and Jacob? I hope it's not overstepping, but I asked Lori how, that the children in Tell Me a Mitzi are Martha or Mitzi and Jacob. And I said, was this Jacob? And Lori said yes. And I said, well, why isn't it Beatrice? And she told me, well, when she was writing it, she asked both of them if they would mind having their name in the book. And Jacob said no, and Beatrice said yes. So that's why it's Tell Me a Mitzi and not Tell Me a Beatrice.
I just want to add that I heard Jacob speak. I just can't remember what the venue was, but it was absolutely exquisite. Rarely do you hear a child speak so beautifully about a parent. The answer to the question is, I want to echo Sarah's resounding yes about that. There's no desire to hide it or to. It's very beautiful and appreciative.
Yeah. The next question is, how did Lori sell her first children's book manuscript? What was her entree to that world?
Karen, do you know anything about that?
I think it might have been through Morris Sendak,
I think so.
through the fairy tales, no?
I think not. Lori had a lot of sort of literary connections, with her husband and everything, and connections to the writers at Farrar Straus, and Michael DiCaprio, the editor there, took her.
Right,
I think that was the first children's. I mean, that was. I know how she got the role of translating Juniper Tree, but that wasn't the first thing that she'd done.
Yeah, I know Michael DiCaprio was also involved in Juniper Tree as well.
And he had a way of sort of going into adult artists and writers and pulling them into children's books. And that might have how knowing her other people's houses probably was a way.
Yeah, that's a question for Beatrice and Jacob as well. My friend Stella asks, did Lori do any drawings of Vienna and childhood memories?
I'm not sure about this. If there are drawings, I would love to see them. I think, Karen, are there one or two drawings of Lori's in the exhibit?
There's only a small one where she does yoga poses, but from what I've seen, she mostly drew people's faces, profiles, and she said she did that when she was bored at faculty meetings, or she would watch TV and just draw somebody, and the expressions on the faces are really amazing. Everybody has a distinct look, and yeah, she was really very gifted. I'm surprised she didn't take it any further. Then one person asked, I don't have a question, but I have read all her adult books, and I'm so moved to hear this presentation. Sarah, I cannot believe you're Uncle Paul's granddaughter. Oh, very nice. Then a question. I'm a writer myself and once spoke with Lori for something I was writing and have just written something about her last book for its upcoming publication. This is Deborah Spark. I seem to know a number of people who knew her and they speak about her as all of you do. Also very nice. One person says, I don't think that her voice is hard to understand. I think it lent charm to her writing. I grew up with a Viennese mother and grandmother. The grammar is similar. The grammar or cadence. And then there's a question to me. Any thoughts about Francis' influence on Lori and her worldview? Sarah will recall that Francie had a wonderful gift of entertaining and understanding children. Unfortunately, I didn't know Franzi, but from her letters, even to Lore as a small child, she was just a complete mother and knew how to mother her. And Lore pointed out to me that she knew how to mother her from afar, which is really a distinct gift as well. Um, yeah. Just a comment that came to Laurie's work last year when I read Other People's Houses. It was that book and those stories I immediately thought of when I saw her kitchen wall. I imagined that girl in other people's kitchens. Amazing. So very glad that Wall of Wonder has has a home at Milkwood. Yeah, and then Shanaz Malikan says, I just wanted to thank you so very much for this very special presentation. Pleasure to meet all of you, and have already had the pleasure of meeting Ellen in person through my very wonderful daughter, Sahar Dartag, who attended her course. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist and really enlightened by this presentation. And then another comment, raising my sons in the 1970s and feeling somewhat isolated, suddenly I found this amazing book about Mitzi. I couldn't get enough of it, and fortunately, my sons felt the same way. The humor appealed to all of us, but most of all, my heart felt so deeply connected to this writer. I knew nothing about New York. I grew up in West Virginia, but I've carried her and her vision my whole life and just recently began her adult books. I've never quite gotten over her joy. Thankful for this gathered group and what you're doing. Very beautiful. Beatrice just wrote back, we have been looking into ways to reissue some of her children's books, nothing to report at this point. And Sarah's Uncle John says, Loris thanks Sarah's grandfather Paul on the inside page of the Juniper Tree for helping her with the book's translation. That's right. Then another question, did she do other translations in addition to the Juniper Tree? As far as children's books are concerned, I don't think so. I translated Ladies' Lunch into German 2 years ago for HarperCollins Germany. And since she still spoke German, I shared all my translations with her, and we had lively discussions about my solutions. And sometimes I incorporated what she said, and she really was very particular about her style, about reproducing her style in German as well. And then a request for reading, the reading of the letter, Paul,
Sure.
that you received from Lore.
I'd be happy to. Let me just get to it here.
Oh, yeah, I'll come back afterwards.
Yeah,
Peter just sent me something that I forgot.
yeah,
Yeah. The book of Adam and Moses, of course, the Bible. Lori translated the Bible, and what she did is she looked at different translations of the Bible in English and in German. And then she also talked to a rabbi about how she would go about translating the Bible. Yeah, thank you, Peter. Yeah, do we want to hear the letter?
I am sorry. If you give me one more second, I have to dig it up because it went away from my computer. So,
do you want me to share it on screen, Paul?
I think that I've got it. I can have it faster here. Okay, I have it here. Okay, I can start now. Okay, I'll read. It says, "Dear Paul O. Zelinsky," because we hadn't, I think, actually met since Yale, which he didn't remember. So I used to marvel at the publishing oddity that keeps the writer and illustrator whose imaginations were cohabiting in the same book from meeting each other's persons. Then, once I did communicate with one of my illustrators, and it made a muddle. There is a reason for not talking to each other before the work is done. It makes sure that each is autonomous in the collaboration, which may be a contradiction, but it is good practice. I'm very sure that Harriet Pincus's setting my Upper West Side 60s Mitzi in 50s Brooklyn added a perfectly new depth and poignancy. That's the most interesting. Then she goes on about what the wonderful things in Purrless. Should I read that or should we end with this?
Read on.
Okay. So now we can talk. She said, you did some things I hadn't meant. I hadn't thought of that cat as knowing, and very charming it is, but as merely cat. And you did some things that I hadn't known I meant. You're quite right about Dylan's size. He's another example of the male, required, desired, but there's too much of him in the doorway, in the room. Goodbye, Dylan. Many wonderful things. Dylan's fly and Mrs. L's covering hers with her purse. I adore the mismatch of Mrs. L's socks in respect to her dress and her footstool in respect to her chair. You're right, she gets everything physical wrong. Oh, that wonderful chair, that lovable footstool, and the back view of the kitten lowering into sleep and Purrless in the act of biting and upside down in air. And just the lovely crayon work in back. It is crayon, isn't it? Dear Paul O. Zelinsky, she said, here's to us, Lore, and then Segal in parentheses.
Beautiful.
That's lovely.
Yeah. Yeah, and Peter or John pointed out that Lore, in collaboration with Uncle Paul, also translated the book Precious Glory. Yeah, thank you. This was a lovely tribute to Lore, her soul, her life, and her writing. I read Mitzi as a child, met her later in my life, and love how you all treasure her legacy. We need more Lore in words and generosity.
Thank you very
Yes.
much.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful conclusion to this event. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks for letting us be part of it.
Yes.
Thank you
Absolutely.
so
Let's
much.
keep reading.
Okay.
Yes,
Goodbye.
thank you. Thank you all very much for joining LBI on this. And thanks for coming. Bye.
My pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.